So all of the platforms in their infinite wisdom have introduced achievements, which are all the same, really, on all platforms, right? Same idea. So achievement being a metagame thing where like some third-party entity is like keeping track of something, and then you like unlock a badge where you're like, hey, I built 1 million of this thing or whatever.
For example, if you have sex with a mind flayer in Baldur's Gate 3, you get the achievement called Mind Blown.
Butterscotch
shenanigans. Hey everybody, welcome to episode 457 of Coffee with Butterscotch, the game dev comedy podcast of Butterscotch Shenanigans. I'm Seth and I'm the games programmer.
I'm Adam and I'm the miscellaneous programmer.
I'm Sam and I'm the artiste.
And this is a show where we talk about life, business, and working in the games industry. Today is March 1st, 22x4. Before we get started, we have a warning. There's going to be profanity in this show. We'd also like to thank our recurring supporters over at moneygrab.bscotch.net. Thank you so much for letting us grab your money every month to support the podcast.
Yeah.
I think we're just going to do questions today. What do you guys think about that?
Let's go.
Yeah.
We're tired.
Hold on. But there's one brag I have before we do questions.
Hit it.
That I forgot about. My guild just killed the second to last boss in WoW last
World
night.
Of Warcraft for
World of Warcraft. So we raid for 6 hours a week. It took us 30 hours to kill this boss, so it took us about 5 weeks. 462 attempts to kill this fuck. And it's only about a 6-minute boss fight. So
Dedication.
It was hard. And there's one boss left still somehow, which is probably, supposedly, I think, a little bit easier, actually. So
yeah, probably be hard to be harder than that. You know what I mean?
This was a real wall. You can like go and look at statistics on how guilds are progressing, and like they're just like thousands and thousands of guilds just stuck on this one boss. Like they all get to it and then they just stop. They just stop progressing for weeks at a time. So yeah, that's pretty cool, pretty intense. All right, let's get to questions. These questions come from our listeners over at podcast.bscotch.net. The highest upvoted question for today comes from Challosis, who says, for Crashlands 2, will you re-record your jingle with everyone in the studio?
Fun fact, the jingle never had everyone in the studio, except for a brief moment in time before I joined, because the jingle predates me.
Yeah, the jingle was because we recorded it when Adam was still in Texas.
Yeah, I think I was part of the studio, but I was
part of the studio, but couldn't get in to record, and so I did the buh and the scotch, and Sam did the tur,
and then Patrick comes in as a third voice at some point. Patrick from Fat Bard.
Fat Bard made the chorus just like by singing it a bunch of times and throwing some sound effects into it. So we recorded it once. It never had everybody in the studio. And there was one change we made though, which is, when we launched Crashlands, the first Crashlands, we still had the splash screen, which just had our 3 heads on it, which we did because we were like, we want people to know that we're a small studio, and like, this is
small team and human beings made this thing.
Yeah. Like a team small enough that all of us can be on the splash screen. But then once we got past Crashlands and we started hiring up and expanding and made Levelhead, we're like, well, this seems really egotistical. Now that there are more people on the team to only have our heads on the splash screen, so we just removed them because it's a studio. It's not just 3 people now. It's and a lot more people than just who's on the main full-time dev team have worked on Crashlands too. We got contractors, we got sound people, we got localization people, we've got play testers. I mean, man, it really takes a village.
We could get a true chorus going, like a real big bunch of people going if you really figured that out. But I don't know how you'd get everybody to sing.
Yeah, and the hard part would be, I got to wrangle everybody, get them to have good enough recording equipment they can do it on their own with a metronome.
We're worldwide. Like we got people working on the thing from like different countries around the world. And, like they have their own audio setups, and oh man,
also, I'm just trying to imagine getting like if I was working on a game for a while and then just sort of like as a contractor or part time or something, and then getting what feels like a very strange request, which is like, hey, could you just sing the sound tur
Tur.
No, like on this note, just into a microphone. Be like, what?
Yeah, we don't do a credits page. You're just part of the chorus.
Yeah,
you're in there.
There's some kind of fun, poetry there.
Yeah, people who know you, they'll be able to pick out your voice.
Totally, yeah.
And people who don't know you aren't looking for your name in the credits anyway because they don't care. So
it is kind of it is sort of a tiny subset of that, just kind of bigger, more interesting problem though of giving credit as part of the process, and like what does it mean to give? Because even things like I updated our about page on our website a couple weeks ago because we had Carl is our new full-time QA. We've had him full-time now for I don't know, 4 months, 6 months. I don't know. It's been a while.
Yeah, it's been a minute.
And and I just I update the website only when I have to, So at some point I had to go do some other updates, and I was like, oh yeah, I should get Carl on our about page. But we now also have Anne, who's our, but she's not on board as like a full-time employee. She's like on as a contractor where we're still trying to figure out like what does it mean to have another artist, kind of just there's just a question mark kind of there, but she's working with us full time right now and doing great. And I was like, so like there's questions of like who goes, and then we have all of our part-time QA who've been with us for a long time. And then we have our contractors, and it's like, I don't really want to have the website, like the about page be this like ever changing like thing I have to maintain of like who's on here, but also don't want to have to decide like, so we just always try to keep it simple. It's like, okay, full-time employees, like that's it. Yep. And then when I remember, right? It's sort of it. But it's the same problem with like a credits page in the game. It's like, you want to make sure that everybody's getting credit, but what does it mean to give them credit? How do you explain what people did? What are the titles? What even names do you put in there?
This makes me think of, you ever see that speech that I think it was Arnold Schwarzenegger gave to, I want to say Stanford or something, as like a keynote speech where he said, whatever you call me, never call me a self-made man.
Yeah.
And he kind of recounted how everything that he achieved in his life, he achieved because somebody else put him in the position where he could do that. Mm-hmm. Somebody gave him a chance. Somebody gave him a role. Somebody helped pay for his tickets to get to the U.S. or like whatever it was. And he couldn't have done any of the things that he did without a whole stack of people behind him, helping out. And it's like, where do you draw the line, of like, the whole world made this game, really.
Which is true. Yeah, exactly. It's one of those, it just like feels bad trying to put these things together. We're just like trying to figure out like how do I describe all the people involved and what they were up to and whatever. Trying to figure out like what are the thresholds for who do we put on here, and it's just a weird, uncomfortable kind of a process that's never.
I do want to put whoever designed my standing desk. I do want to put them in the credits because that's been real nice.
Yeah, and I really like my keyboard, so I should probably get Keycron in there.
That's a good keyboard. Who are all the engineers that designed that thing? It was good.
Yeah, I've been using a Zense Labs tablet, as opposed to like a Cintiq or something. They're like a newer company. That might be nice. Be like, hey, this is made on this thing. You know what I mean?
Give them credit.
I don't know.
Let's get their recording for the jingle.
Give your whole company basically just have 1,000 voices. Maybe that's what we should do. Is actually just do it up to the point where it is like more of a chorus. Mm-hmm. Continue it's random voices, or we just make the bards sing it, thousands of times basically to build the chorus, but just build it up way more intensely for this one into an epic,
like a Gregorian chant that like coalesces into a dirge.
Jingle.
Well, I love those when you have those, like when you do have those notes that, in like one of those sort of cathedral style interiors where it bounces.
Get that reverb.
It just kind of rings at the end. Mm-hmm. Like we get that for the shenanigans part where it kind of ramps up, right? Just the butterscotch. But then that shenanigans though is just like
full on.
The whole world came in singing in the most enormous cathedral that could ever possibly exist.
Yeah.
And then
it goes on for 10 minutes. It just keeps going.
Yeah. If you've been surprised in the past when your volume was on, like on your phone on accident.
Well, you wait for it.
Just wait. Yeah.
We're coming for you.
You're going to be crying.
Get those tissues to dab the blood out of your ears because it's coming. All right. Next question comes from Disgruntled Pineapple, who says, what did you guys think of the Five Nights at Freddy's movie? In a similar vein, what are your thoughts on video games being made into movies and shows like Mario or The Last of Us? Which is a pretty hilarious pair of...
Quite the duo. I did not see the Five Nights at Freddy's movie.
I saw the first like half of it or something.
It seems like it says something.
Yeah, I mean it was like fine. It was like fine.
If you saw the first half of a movie and then just never bothered to watch the second half, I feel like that's a review in and of itself.
And it was just kind of like boring horror fare, you know, where it was kind of, I couldn't really tell what the vibe was supposed to be because it kind of felt more like comedy. I think it is a comedy. I think
it's got that kind of like comedy horror B movie vibe.
Yeah, but the movie itself like is so serious because like the main character's like struggling and he's like poor. He's just like trying to support his sister. I can't remember really anymore anyway, but like he's like trying to support his sister, but he doesn't have any income and he's like having trouble holding down a job, and he finally gets this job at, you know, Freddy's being the security person or whatever. But it's like, so it's this like very dark, like personal story kind of underlying it that takes itself very seriously. But then it gets into like the Freddy's place and like
animatronic beings coming to life.
Yeah, this was like a weird animatronic horror movie. So like I could see how people would have fun with it. It was like, I'll put it that way. And it was kind of fun. I just like didn't quite understand the vibe. I didn't really know why any of this was unfolding, you know. And because I'm not a fan of the franchise, then it just it just didn't do anything for me. But that said, I do feel like if I was a fan of the franchise, I would feel like they did right by it. You know what I mean? Which I think is pretty rare. Because to me, like that's really what the question comes down to is it possible for movies based on video games to do it right, to like give you the same thing that you were getting out of the video game, but in this other media format?
Yeah, well, I think this is actually too narrow of a framing, because this is just about an adaptation, right? Because you ever hear people like
transmedia,
the book was better. But even it's like we were just chatting about the live action Avatar, you know, Netflix's new remake. Yeah, and it's like they took something and in one medium, which was animated, and they adapted it to live action, which is, it feels like the same medium because you're watching it, you know, it's a show, right? But it's not. It's not the same. You could do stuff in a cartoon that you cannot do in live action without an absolutely insane effects budget, right?
And even outside of effects, just also the way that characters interact and stuff. Like there's a kind of like when you watch a play, like the voicing, like everything about it is obviously fake, even when it's really well done, right? Because it's in this like uncanny valley of real life, right? Versus like when you watch a cartoon, like you expect it to break rules about how two people interact, right? Because you'll have there was a thing that I noticed in some anime I was watching a while ago. That was I noticed became very funny, which was when two characters kind of like were done talking to each other, one would just turn around and leave. Like they would just leave now, right? Which is not a thing that happens.
That's not how anybody operates. Yeah, but it's also like in movies. Something pisses me off. There's like a couple things that piss me off in movies where people will they'll have a conversation on the phone or something, and then they just hang up. They never say bye. They'll be like, "Yeah, can you meet me over here at 6?" They're like, "Yep," and then they just hang up.
But that's one of those things that's like for each of these different media, we get used to like whatever the representation is of like the abstraction from real life, right? And we get used to how the form does that by being trained over time as we co-evolve with that media, right? And so when you want to move from one medium to another, you have to understand like what is it that works in this medium, right? Like you have to be an expert in that, but you also have to be an expert in the source.
It's about the soul of the source material.
It's about the soul.
Like why people liked it.
It's a localization problem, like back to our discussion about that, right? Which is you have to fully understand the source material and the destination and what those two media are good at and how it is that they're abstracting away from like, you know, reality, right? So that you can bridge the gap. And that process, I think almost everybody fails at because it's extremely challenging.
But for certain games, it's easier, right? And I think that's the note for me. So like, because Last of Us, for example, to me is a much more sensible adaptation into a show because the game itself is
already a cinematic story.
Yeah, it's like if you turned the God of War, like the newest God of War, into a movie or a show, like it almost is already. So you can kind of just be like, okay, let's just fucking.
But the interesting thing is, if you tried to turn the first God of War into a movie and you hadn't had the intervening games, it would probably be a real uncompelling movie because the first God of War did not really have much narrative depth to it other than like,
Well, that's where you go from. That's where that's now an inspiration based thing, right? Where you're like, you take the source, you take the core characters, and maybe some of the key elements of the thing, right? But then you say, how do I tell a story that feels the same as this, but it's just its own thing? You know?
I think the general problem is typically that what you see in video games with like capital letters is that you don't have character growth. You typically have power or mechanical growth, right? Which is not the same thing at all. It's like, oh yeah, you hit 10 times harder now, or like, oh, your sword is now on fire. That means nothing from a storytelling standpoint. It's very cool in the context of video game, and it is actually all you need in the context of video game. But it is woefully insufficient when it comes to
have that
actual storytelling.
Yeah, you don't have that inner monologue like you do in because like in an anime, it's also building power, but also the character is really whiny at the beginning, right? And really, and then really also down on themselves. And then as they grow to their power, they also grow into their sense of, self and so on, right? And you just lose that completely.
Yeah, so I think I watched the Last of Us series, which is great. The show.
Fucking stellar. Yep.
Brutal. And, I think does a good job of basically translating that overall story and overall kind of vibe from there. I didn't watch the Mario one. Did you guys watch that?
I have not.
I did actually a couple of weeks ago.
Was it good?
It was great.
Yeah, I heard it was fun.
I mean, here's the thing. It was super fun and extremely well put together. Like the visuals were great, the pacing was great, the acting was great. But much like a Mario game, it didn't mean anything.
Yeah.
Right. Like afterwards, I was like, wait, what was the story again? I can't fucking remember. Like they went to these different locations. They jumped around on a bunch of shit. I think there was some plot point about Koopa, like Bowser wanting to marry Princess Peach, but that didn't really matter. I guess
you're just there to vibe.
I was there to watch cool Mario Karts and turtle shells and, kind of see like how do they integrate all these weird aspects of the Mario universe into a story. I did find there's one kind of interesting thing where they did do that same thing. You remember the old Mario movie from the 90s?
Yeah, that was a trip.
Where like Mario and Luigi are plumbers in Brooklyn or whatever, right?
In real life,
and then like
real human
real
people.
That was actually spooky as fuck because it's like turning people into lizards and stuff.
It was the old Mario movie is like only very tangentially related to the Mario franchise. But in this one, it was like Mario and Luigi are starting like a plumbing business, and then they end up like getting sucked through a pipe, like a magic pipe into the Mushroom Kingdom. And I like that was like the most salient plot point for me. And then like what happened in the Mushroom Kingdom, I actually don't really remember.
Well, so which is the same as all Mario games.
Yeah. But the thing is, like, I felt like they nailed it, and I felt like it was great. Much in the same way that like you're not going to play a Mario game and walk away like emotionally changed as a person.
No.
Interesting.
And that's also true of the movie because it's true to the source.
Was there a character arc present? I mean, there must have been, right?
Ish, I guess. Like Mario and Luigi wanted to start their business, and then like at the end they do that. And like Mario has to learn how to jump around and jump on shit and do obstacle courses, But I don't know.
But I think also like because. Depending on what you're going for, you don't need a character arc. You need something for people to hold on to, right? And like a character arc is one thing for people to hold on to, and especially if you want something to have like a lasting impact, right? But you can think of also like a stand-up comedy. Like it's just a bunch of jokes, Sometimes they have a character arc though, right? And those are the ones that kind of stick with you, right? Sometimes the jokes go deeper, but it can also be a bunch of jokes and still be satisfying, right? And I think, and it sounds to me like that's what I think. Five Nights at Freddy's, I think it's kind of like, I think it was trying to like have like a character arc kind of stuff. I just wasn't sure why. But still what it did though is it had the whole like, we're going to have like some fun jump scares and like, you kind of know what you're getting into and you're going to have a fun time, right? Even though there's not really a lasting impact. And I think that, and I do think that still works. Like you can still do it. It's when you end up in that in-between space where you're not doing any of that.
Yeah, decide.
Yeah, because I think actually probably the reason why this conversation happens more about video games to movies than most other things is back to Sam's point. In good storytelling, things are character driven, right? It's like you're following a protagonist or whatever, and like they've got some flaws and they've got some goals and things go wrong and how do they deal with it? And sometimes they put themselves into worse situations because they because of their flaw, because of who they are. And the events of the story naturally unfold because of who that person is, right? And like Sam was saying, in a video game, you can have a million different players who are all different people play through the same game and go through the same plot points because games are more action driven. And
on average,
on average, yeah. And you need like to have like an easy adaptation. You need a game that is already extremely narratively focused and less kind of action focused because then at that point the story is character driven.
Yeah,
right?
I would say it's not necessarily less action focused so much as like what a game is a thing you mechanically interact with. So that is always present at a baseline. And what's interesting about them in their rawest form is basically it's a compulsion loop thing. It's just like number gets bigger, that's good, like it's very simple.
But that only feels good if you are the one whose number is getting bigger.
Yes.
So like watching somebody else's number get bigger.
Real boring.
It's pretty boring.
There's no streamers for Cookie Clicker. You know what I mean? Like that's not really the thing.
Yeah, that's true. Actually,
because it doesn't.
There might be. I don't know, but I'm pretty sure there's not.
I'm sure if there is, it's because the person's already like gigantic. But I'm saying like you're not going to get the kind of thing you need from a watchability standpoint out of like an inflation based game. Right. Like,
yeah, because playing like games are about how you feel as the player.
Yeah.
And like movies and shows and books and all that, it's about how the characters feel, and you're empathizing with them, but you're living through them. You're not experiencing it yourself. Right. So I think it's just like we were just talking about how I think there's going to be the Murderbot books are going to be translated into an Apple TV series, which if you haven't read the Murderbot Diaries,
that's great. So fun.
Read these books. I actually held off on reading them because, the name, it's the Murderbot. And I'm like, I don't know about that. But it's like this very wholesome kind of heartfelt / sci-fi /
murder. There's murder.
Murder.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
It's great.
It's
really well done.
it's one of my top novels / novel series of all time.
Yeah.
It's
But turning that into a show is going to be real fucking hard because most of the story in the books is driven by the internal monologue of the main character who you were following this whole time. And I would say this is probably the quintessential strong and silent type, right?
Yeah.
As in like they really don't want to interact with people or talk with people at all.
That's
they have
their
a lot
whole
of
thing. Yeah,
That's their whole
a lot
thing.
of stuff going on in their head, which is where the kind of a lot of comedy comes from, just in the interactions that are in the book, right?
Yeah. So it's almost like they might have to like pull a Deadpool kind of thing or something
Well,
where
that's
it's
what-
like
yeah,
you
That's
can
what
actually
they-
like
it would have to be kind of
but
hear
there's
what this
still
character's
also
thinking.
but that series, even though that's true, there is still a lot that happens between like Murderbot and the characters, and there's a lot of action.
it's a lot of action.
A lot of stories unfolding, a lot of interesting character dynamics between other characters as well, right? So there's still enough there that like you would lose quite a bit by losing all the stuff that like is going on in Murderbot's brain, right?
Yeah.
But there's still enough left that it might work even without it. It's really hard to guess, it would depend on how the show developers do. But it feels like it needs to be more, like anime style, where like a third of the show is just the inner monologue, right? While stuff is going on. But
So again, just adapting anything to any other thing is hard. And even when it comes to like making a sequel to something, it's like we were just talking about how like the first God of War game is not the same kind of game as the most recent God of War game. And they still had to make it feel like God of War, but told through this completely new medium of like a narrative focused game versus this just like arcade style action game, right? It's very hard to do, and most people do it badly because it's so hard, and that's why that's why we have these conversations. You
think of it as like it's already hard. It's hard to just write a story when you're fluent in the medium that you're trying to create that story in, right? It's already almost impossible to do something that then a lot of people like at the end, right?
Yep.
When you want to adapt it, it feels like you're gonna have an easier time because you've got source material to work with, right? But it doesn't actually make it easier. It just changes what's difficult. But actually, it's not even that. You keep the original difficulty, which is you still have to tell a compelling story, like in the medium that you're targeting, right?
But then now with it,
but it has to be consistent enough with the source that the people who you're trying to sell this to come into it. They feel like they know what they're going to expect, or they have expectations coming in, and those expectations are positively satisfied, right? And like that, it's just we're even dealing with this with Crashlands 2, which is like the Crashlands to Crashlands 2 jump in terms of like experiential thing, right? Like actually, like I think we've managed to make it so it's going to feel like what really is just more Crashlands, right? But even to do that, we were talking about a new ballyhoo I want to put together about the pet system, right? And I don't actually don't know what the design is of the pet system in Crashlands 2. And so I was like, Seth, give me a rundown of like how do pets work in Crashlands 2 versus like Crashlands 1, so I can then put that together into a thing to send out to people, you know. And so he wrote this thing up and then like explained it to me, and I was like, holy shit! Like there's the pet system in Crashlands 2 versus Crashlands 1 is like there's so much more stuff going on. Mm-hmm. But miraculously, like experientially, it basically just feels like the same thing though, right? It's really weird how that's true. And that has to do with like the medium is the same. The way that like you interact is like basically the same, right? And so, but even there, like a lot of design, a lot of like effort had to go into making it so that the pet system was better and more interesting, but also somehow the same
felt
thing.
the same.
Yeah, somehow it feels the same while being very different. And that was for all of Crashlands 2. That was a huge challenge, even though like it's the same view on the world. It's like the same core characters. It's like it's a continuation of the original story told using exactly the same kind of medium, right? And even that was a lot of why it's been so difficult to make Crashlands 2. Mm-hmm. So yeah, imagine if we were like, we want to make Crashlands 2, but it's a movie, right? Like what the fuck does that look like?
I have no
I guess
idea.
Flux chopping down trees for like a montage,
you're not gonna watch that. Yep.
It's the same thing.
You take out all the crafting because nobody. I guess you could do it in like a couple times, like Tony Stark building his suit in a cave with a box of scraps. That's cool, right? But then like if that's the whole movie, it's just Tony Stark moving from location to location, building increasingly complex suits. It's like you see him like with the shitty suit, and then he's got his good suit, and those are the two kind of like engineering montages. But that's not the whole movie. That's just details, right? So anyways, it's hard. I don't know.
Yeah. On that note, did you guys see the SNL skit that was Mario Kart with The Last of Us
with Pedro Pascal,
and it was done like Last of Us style, so it's like dark, grungy. Mario Kart.
They had to like take the Rainbow Road across some apocalyptic hellscape or something like that. And
it is one of the best pieces of media that I've ever seen. It was so good. It's great. But I think that's an adaptation in this really interesting way where it's like that thing is true to the spirit of both of those completely separate pieces of media that happen to be video games, right? But like completely true to both of them.
Yeah, but I would say there's a lot of things you can get away with in
in a short
form sketch, right?
I don't think you could turn it into a movie.
Yeah,
but maybe you could. But the fact that they were even able to turn it into a really compelling, like few-minute short.
Oh no, that's impressive.
Was very. I think that's one of those things. Again, like all this comes down to it's always execution. You know, there's nothing inherently true about like video games or this and movies or that like makes it so that the bridge between them has to be bad, right? That's just not the reality. The reality is that the difference between the two things is what defines the challenge you have to overcome, right? And the shape of like how things can be that are going to then accomplish what you set out to do. But like nobody who loves Mario and nobody who loves The Last of Us was disappointed by that short. Right. Nobody, because it's somehow they understood the source material and they understood what they were trying to do in this particular way, where they gave us something completely new in a new medium that made us all just like the source material more, you know?
And I think recently a lot of studios have proven that it's not inherently a problem. So like Arcane, amazing show.
Yeah.
Absolutely amazing, right? The Mario movie, great. The Last of Us, great. Halo, not good, apparently. The Witcher, not good, right? It's like just like any genre.
But The Witcher was like fun. Like I had fun with Witcher, at least the first season, you know. But like, it wasn't great.
It's fun to watch because monsters are fun, you know what I mean? But like, it's like a monster flick thing, but it didn't nail it at all as far as like the story aspects of that whole thing go, right?
It felt like it was trying to be 32 different things, which is probably true. That's probably what was going on. And it just got too in the weeds, you know? But it's hard to make good stuff It's even harder to adapt stuff, but it's definitely doable. And some of the best shows or best films that I've seen recently have been things that have been adapted from something else. So I don't know. It's just hard. All right, next question comes from IllegallySam, who says, now that content development for Crashlands 2 is well underway, have you started thinking about achievement design for the game yet? If not, at what point in the game's development do you think you will start tackling the topic? I'd also just like to hear about your thoughts on achievement design in general, especially in how it differs between games and game genres.
Okay, I want to talk about the part of achievement design that is not the part that people think about, which is cross-platform achievement design.
Yep. That's the most sticky part of it.
Yeah. So all of the platforms in their infinite wisdom have introduced achievements, which are all the same, really, on all platforms, right? Same idea. So achievement being a metagame thing where like some third-party entity is like keeping track of something, and then you like unlock a badge where you're like, hey, I built 1 million of this thing or whatever, right? So I think,
for example, if you have sex with a mind flayer in Baldur's Gate 3, you get the achievement called Mind Blown.
Nice. Yeah. So
Baldur's Gate has some very good ones.
Well, the thing is now, because the question, so there's a question which is then what do you use these for? Because all the platforms have it, right? And you can use them for various sort of metagame purposes, right? Because they're kind of external to the game. You could basically have an interface in game also if you wanted to like have it more tightly integrated. But you don't need to. You can basically just send data off to the service and let it do its thing. And what we see in practice is people use them for all kinds of stuff. They use them for jokes, right? Mm-hmm. Which is like where you're like, you wouldn't expect them to have marked, permanently upon your record, basically that you did a particular goofy thing or something. And then they do, or it'll be to sort of compel you to try things a new way without having to do like in-game mechanisms to make you want to do that. So that you can try to get some extra kind of replayability out of the game. So like that was an experience I had with Half-Life 2, where you can carry the gnome you find under the bed at one of the very beginning parts of the game all the way to the end and put him in a rocket, right? So I did that because I was like, not even because I wanted the achievement, because the achievement told me that was a thing I could do, right? So I was like,
and then your gears start turning. You're like, how would you even do
it just
that?
Gave me a fun
it's a
challenge.
puzzle.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And at the end, it gets marked, again, indelibly upon your record. Or you can use them just to like soak up sort of point systems, right? Because all the platforms also like give you cross game sort of like tallies of all of the things that you've unlocked or whatever. And a lot of players it's a metric, so people go try to get that metric high, right? So there's a whole bunch of reasons to do it. And so I wish that our only consideration was what would be the most fun and compelling way to like use this metagame system on top of Crashlands 2. But we have a core constraint though, which is if we're going to allow players to take their data cross-platform, then now the question is what does it mean when you go if you go beat a boss and we have an achievement for that, and you do that on Steam, and then you flip over to your Netflix version on your phone, right? And now you've beaten that boss, but you beat it on Steam, right? Do we give you that point over there too? Because what you would think is we would just say if we can hold on to that data and move it between them, we would just say yes, obviously.
Which is what we have done historically.
But it turns out that some platforms, PlayStation, I'm eyeballing in particular, but some platforms do not like this idea. And so they'll say instead is that you have to have somehow fully separate, conceptually separate things on each platform so that you can somehow manage to make it so that people can play the game on both without their carried over progress causing an unlock. And
if this sounds as a player completely insane to you, it's because it is.
Yeah.
So for example, if you kill a boss, if you kill a boss and then you're on the same save on PlayStation, you cannot kill the boss again because the boss is already dead.
It's dead now.
In a lot of game contexts. Some games, sure, like a lot of replayable games, whatever. But actually, a lot of games you cannot.
Yeah, Crashlands take it.
Yeah, you would have to replay the whole game.
The whole thing.
Which is what they want you to do. Yeah. The whole point is they make it so that you can't. I mean, this has just been an ongoing battle that we have, not just with achievements, but in general, where we want to do cross-platform stuff because it's best for our players.
Yeah.
It just is, right?
In our opinion, players own the data that they generate by playing your game.
Yeah. It's your save. You should be able to take your save from your computer to your phone to your PlayStation, to your Xbox, and just whatever you've got, whatever combos of devices you have, you should be able to just continue playing the same save everywhere. And if you beat a boss on your PC and then you boot up your phone, you should get the achievement on your phone because you already did it. You did it.
The achievement shouldn't be beat this thing on PlayStation or beat this thing on Steam, right? It should be beat it, but that's the end of the fucking story.
But every platform wants to behave as if no other platforms exist, and their primary goal is to entrap players on their platform, and for people who care about achievements, make them do it again and put all that playtime into this platform, as opposed to just saying, oh yeah, like the point of achievements is for fun for the players. No, for a big company, it's an engagement metric that keeps people on their platform. That's why they want achievements. And so they're going to do whatever they can to keep us from migrating data like that. And we have to battle it out just every time. Every time we put a game out.
Which is all to say that achievements are therefore a liability for us in terms of like how we handle them. Because if we design them in a particular way that doesn't take into account the fact that we might have to force players to repeat the process onto their platforms, then that makes it really difficult for us to then work with a business partner who requires that. And we never know, because also the business partners are changing each time we launch a new game, based on just what the market is up to. But also individual business partners change their minds, and not just only in a good direction either. Like they go back and forth where they'll be like, all right, we got a new person in charge, and this person thinks that cross-platform is the literal spawn of Satan. So that's not. So now we're going to lock it down. And then a few years later, somebody else comes in charge and like, well, that was really stupid because now everybody hates us. So what if we stopped doing that? Because it has no benefit, but it does make people mad, so let's just quit it. And then they do that. And then everyone's like, oh yeah, now we can but games take 3 years to make, right? Yeah. You don't know, and once you launch them, you don't know like if in 2 years from now we're gonna be like, ooh, a new platform has opened up, or this platform has changed their policies to make it more viable for indies or whatever. So now we want to go on new platforms well after we launch. That's we want to have room for that. And the moment we set down a set of achievements that can't satisfy the ability to have them be independent per platform, we make our lives difficult.
Yeah. In general, each platform's primary mission is to sabotage players' enjoyment of the other platforms.
Yeah.
And part of the way they do that is by interfering with data migration.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's silly because, again, like the win is not, there's not really a win. This is what I would call, this is to me a corporate theater, right? Which is like, you can imagine people arguing about like, oh, how do we make it so that this is like the place for the game to be played or whatever, like it's plays best here, and it's like, don't let people do this thing. That's not really accurate in a way. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't work either. It just kind of pisses people off.
It makes people want to flee the moment they can.
Not want to flee, even it's just so much as not involve themselves in whatever that is, right? And so I think that's the downside. But I think that when it comes to then the types of achievements, you kind of have these. To Adam's kind of enumeration earlier, you have what I call almost like pacers, which is like they're just marking your progress. So that's like if the whole game has like 4 boss fights that you beat in order, you are getting an achievement per boss fight. It's weird because again, when you say the word achievement, it's like there's always an argument on what exactly it is, but I think there's these different this taxonomy of them, and then there's do weird stuff achievements, right? And like secret achievements where you need to put spoilers in for stuff so that the achievements aren't actually visible before the game starts because people look at achievement lists, right? So there's a large number of these things that then like when you put them all together, each platform also doesn't even support certain kinds of these things. What I mean by that is like spoiler tags, like a spoiler achievement. Like, hey, there's a major twist in the middle of the game, and here we're going to use a pacer. You got to that point, and now we say this thing about what happened. Like if you
Steam has that. I don't know if anybody else does.
Yeah, I don't think anybody else uses it. And then also all of them have a certain amount of like. Actually, some of them have a limited number of achievements you can have.
Yep.
Or a way on Xbox, it's like you have to divvy up 1,000 points amongst your achievements.
Yeah, it's really weird.
So what happens if you want to add one later?
Great question.
Get fucked. What happens if the game has less than 1,000 achievement points at the start, well, it's a little less interesting to achievement hunters. So if you leave some room, so that
if you leave room to add something later, then now you've decreased.
Yeah, I would say actually,
it's so fucking weird.
Achievements have become much the same as cloud saving for us, which is we have cloud saving and it works great.
Mm-hmm.
We don't need to use any platform's cloud saving. In the same way, we can build our own achievement system and have it work exactly the way we want. However, both with cloud saving and with achievements, no platform allows us to do this. Yeah. They require us to use theirs also.
And the thing is, like, I'm okay with that.
Right.
I'd be okay with that because, again, like, people play on certain platforms, and a lot of the value of the achievements comes from them being this meta layer on top of like all of your gameplay, right? So I get that, but the fact that, again, it's not just that there's a lack of freedom in our ability to just do what we need to do. Essentially, that makes it all really, really annoying.
Because they're not treated as like, oh, here's some features that we can implement to like give developers a new way to like do stuff, a new way to express things about their game, or whatever. It's instead, here's our very specific set of constraints that we require developers to use. That is not designed to give them flexibility, to like give them creative freedom. It's designed
nor does it take into account any of the existing features on any of the other platforms that we know our players play on. The craziest one to me for this is always the mobile versus console jump. I get it if you're Sony and Xbox fighting each other, right? About like what specific stuff is going on, but or
doesn't
Apple
make sense. Really,
it doesn't quite make sense, but like it makes some more sense.
It never makes sense, but it makes.
But when you're like
the least sense,
when you're like Sony, and then there's a game that's like, oh, we're also available on mobile, and they're like, look, people are either choosing
this is
to
a
play
competing
this on a phone. I'm like, could you stop? Jeez, guys.
Yeah.
Like,
Point being, like, if you've got a game, if you're in your house and you got your PlayStation next to you and you got your phone in your hand and you can choose which one to play the game on, you're gonna play it on the PlayStation. It's a big screen. You got a controller, you got tactile feedback,
or if
you got speakers.
Maybe someone else is playing it on there. Why the fuck would it be better for you to just not be able to play the game? It doesn't make any sense.
Well, that's the thing, Sam. Go buy your second PlayStation and your second TV and your second couch. Oh, just buy a second room so you can, have your full PlayStation.
Get a second mortgage to deal with.
Mortgage, which I guess the point being, like, it's like, I like that term, corporate theater. It's basically companies making all these moves to kind of like make the other companies look bad, to interfere with their players' ability to enjoy things made by the other companies. And the people who bear the price of it is us, is the developers
and players.
Players bear the burden of bad experiences, and we bear the cost of having to literally develop. We have to provide those bad experiences by demand, and we have to do a bunch of work to re-implement the same achievement code and cloud saving code and everything else, just every single platform we go to.
It's great.
And none of this needs to happen. Like if all these platforms are just like, yeah, you can use our achievements or not. You can use our cloud saving or not. You can migrate data or not. You can do cross-platform or not. We don't give a fuck. If they all said that, everybody's lives would be better, including the platforms, frankly, because they have to spend a lot of time enforcing these rules that they've made up.
Or arguing about it with people.
Yeah. And like, we also try to take the policy where if the reason that you have a policy, right, if you explain that reason to your end customer, would you feel like a dick while explaining it?
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And if the answer is yes, maybe don't. Maybe don't do that.
Pretty simple litmus test usually.
Pretty simple.
Does this matter?
Would you be ashamed to say this out loud?
Yeah.
If yes, don't. Maybe don't do it.
Yeah.
So that's where we're at with achievements.
Yep.
Yeah, which I think the answer to the question then is we haven't done them yet. We haven't even thought about it.
We'll
do them
end.
as late as possible, and we're going to be really mad the whole time we're doing it.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna be screaming.
But not because of just what achievements are.
Oh, no, I love
because they are yet another pawn in the stupid battleground between platforms.
Yep.
And we are just caught in the middle of it. So
yeah.
I think that wraps that. All right, next question comes from Shout64, who says, you recently mentioned using Notion as your team's productivity tool. What motivated you to switch away from Favro? How are you liking Notion for teamwork? I've been using it for a while with personal projects and organization, but I've yet to try it with a team. So we are still using Favro.
You can think of it as Notion as our knowledge base is more.
Yeah.
Is more what it is.
Because it it doesn't have the same kinds of like features and automations that we use for managing large numbers of tasks and projects. You could probably do that with Notion somehow with like a lot of extra engineering slapped on top of it.
It would be bad.
You could.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they
it would be
don't really
pretty
have,
tough.
they don't really have because they technically have like databases is what they call them, right? And it's like, which are, fancy tables with database like behaviors. And I've played, but like I personally find them to be, I'd rather be using Airtable or Google Sheets by a million miles if I'm going to be doing table stuff,
Yeah.
It's just not sufficient features, but I mean, it is technically there. So if you wanted to do everything in one place and have it, because like the other thing is like other tools that are meant for work management are generally really bad knowledge bases.
Yes.
Yep.
And so each of these, it's like, you're choosing one preference over the other. So what we do is we just use the tool that is best for the job as much as possible. And we try not to like use one tool just to use one tool, even though it sucks at something, But if you were to use one tool and you needed it to be a knowledge base and so on, like I think Notion is probably a good candidate.
Especially I think if your team's small too, like say you're actually small.
And you've got simple workflows.
Yeah, simple workflows is basically what it comes down to. I think, if it was like still just the three of us or something, then like maybe you could kind of capture the stuff you got to do. And there's not nearly as much like management of giant amounts of backlog work per se.
Yeah, well,
I still wouldn't do it because I think like if you're talking about managing work, Notion is not actually for
not for
managing
that.
work. It's for those knowledge-based things. So
Yeah, I would think about how the flow of information is supposed to work in these different contexts. So when it comes to getting work done, the whole goal is you produce information that becomes tasks, and then once the tasks are done, the information goes away, right? So like
it's
when you check when you check something off a checklist, you don't want it to stay there and then have to scroll past it every time you want to see what you got to do today, right? Because then within a few weeks, you got 3,000 checked off items that are just sitting there uselessly, right? Maybe if you want that for some kind of historical thing, but it's not really helping you parse out what you have to do, right? With something like Notion, it doesn't support that kind of like easy generation and removal of tasks and moving them through systems as well. It does have Kanban boards and stuff like that, but again, like you got to kind of engineer all that out kind of yourself. But Notion works super, super well for long-standing information where you need to have just an easy way to search through stuff, to organize things, to collaborate on producing information. So for Crashlands 2, we've got like our story Bible in Notion, as well as like we'll use that to store design documents and ideation and like to collaborate on stuff. And Notion now has their new AI Q&A assistant that they're rolling out, where which we haven't used it as much because again, like most of what we do is in Favro when we're actually working. But the idea is you can pop open Notion and you can ask questions to this AI assistant, which will then go through all of your nested documents that you've got in Notion and be able to tell you where to find stuff or whether you have information on a thing or to summarize something without you having to
it is good.
dig forever.
I've used it a couple times. So
I haven't used it enough yet, but this is the one fucking feature I want from LLMs. And I'm so mad because everybody's trying to give me content generation. And I'm like, I don't want shittily generated stuff. I don't want the problem that I don't have.
I don't want more stuff.
I don't want more stuff. I want to be able to deal with the stuff I've got. Like that's the hard problem, and especially for teams, because like in teams, the more stuff that people produce, the worse your problems become because now you have more stuff that's being managed. You have to like find things and it becomes just harder and harder as more stuff comes out. The last thing we need in the whole fucking universe is like things that can generate infinite prose without, any effort, right? It's literally the last thing we need. What we do really need, though, is the ability to search and summarize information. And I'm just so mad that that's not the full focus. Like that's where all efforts should be going for this LLM stuff. It's like, which is to say, Notion started with just hey, we can start writing stuff for you. And I was like, why?
I could already do that.
That literally doesn't help. But then later they came out and they had this, now you can actually search stuff. And I was like, yes, finally, somebody is doing something. Simultaneously, I got a notice from Google who changed the name of Bard to, what did they change it to?
Gemini.
Google can't stop fucking changing the names of things. I am so tired.
Corporate theater weird shit. I was like,
they're just
decide who's in charge and just let them name stuff for a fucking minute and leave it up.
that they changed the name and they're like, I got to pop up in my Gmail inbox. They're like, oh, hey, you can now like sign up for a trial of the Enterprise Gemini feature. It'll let you, and then it lists the things it lets you do. And it's like, write emails for you, write Google Docs for you, write below. And I'm like, you're a search company.
Let me search my docs that I have.
Problem, which is I need to be able to, and you have all of my emails. You have fuckloads of my docs. You have like, the problem that I always have is where is my stuff? Mm-hmm. What happened? What did I say to this person? Right? Mm-hmm. What is the summary? Like, where is this contract that we like were discussing a year ago about blah? Right? Like,
yeah. Or can I talk to Gemini and be like, hey, who did we talk to about GDC back in like 2018? Mm-hmm. Can you give me a list of those people? And it's like, yeah, I could dig for an entire afternoon manually searching up terms in my email and looking through dates and stuff. Or if I could just ask this assistant whether or not that even exists, and if so, give me a quick summary of it.
And give me the links to it so I can evaluate your summary, because I also don't trust that. The main thing I want is like, get me to it. I want fancy as fuck search. That's what I want. And I'm just so mad every time a new, like everyone's like telling the next auto content generation feature. I'm like, this is not
all this is going to do.
This is not where the usefulness is.
It's just growing the piles of garbage.
Yeah.
Even higher. Yeah. And I've seen so much commentary about how like, Google search has deteriorated over the years because they have to keep increasing their quarterly profits for some reason, because we've all decided is important. Mm-hmm. And to do that, they have to keep jamming more and more sponsored contents and ads and opinionated things into your search results. Often to a point where whatever you search for, you will always get the opposite first because it's a competitor, right? Like you're like, I want this, I want Favro, and then they'll be like, here's a link to Monday.com.
Have you tried Asana? I'm like,
have you tried?
Get the fuck out of my way because I asked for a particular thing. Like, leave me alone. Yep. I'm getting that, I don't need that.
So people are like, like the volume of stuff online is getting to the point where search is nearly impossible, and generative AI is exploding the volume of that content, and we do not have good ways to sift through it.
I don't know if you guys have seen it, because I always think on top of all the web dev stuff. One of the new fun things that people are doing, there's a guy who's bragging about it, about how he managed to what do they call it, traffic jacking or whatever, but like managed to basically steal like an enormous fraction of the traffic from some other big website. Because what they did was because websites have what they call it. They basically have an index of all the pages on a site, right? Because so you feed that to Google and Bing and so on, so that they know what your pages are, so they can go crawl all your pages and put them into their search index, right? So you basically just have like out in the open, and the web is largely pretty open, right? So you have out in the open just an index of all your pages, and then all your pages are probably available, right? At least to some extent, because you needed to make them available for search engines, right? So all your content is there and accessible. And so somebody realized like, oh, hey, with OpenAI, I could basically write a little bot that just like goes and gets the index of like all the pages and like page titles, like of all this different stuff on this other website, and just make a mirror of it that isn't just stealing, because I didn't just literally copy it, but I can feed the title into ChatGPT for each one of those pages, right? And have it give me a new article, right? And then I can play my additional shitty SEO games, right, to juice it up in the rankings. And so this person managed to basically like just effectively clone, but just make a much worse version of an existing website, without it being just obviously plagiarism. So there's not an obvious legal recourse there, right? Mm-hmm. And then managed to get all of the search results above the original source. And now this has become a new thing that this is a new way of making ad dollars, right, on the web. And so now this is just an increasingly common thing of a tactic for how you get those Google views. Yeah.
So it's kind of like what we have to deal with as game developers when people, make like a cracked copy of your game, or like when we released Crashlands, there was a group of people in China who they didn't rebuild the game, but they rebuilt a lot of like the textures and stuff, and they translated it into Chinese, and they did all this stuff, and they released that version of it.
Crazy.
Which in that case wasn't a competitor because we didn't have a Chinese version of the game. So we're like, oh, great. Like we don't get any money from this, but hey, more players. So that's cool. But yeah, this is like that, except it is direct competing, and it's something that now websites have to worry about, not just like game developers or software developers.
But then on the user side too, right? Like now when you go to search for a thing where historically you could at least count on like the stuff that would be relatively high ranked would be well written by an expert on the topic, right? Especially like in the tech space where you're trying to figure out how to solve some tech problem, right? And I know the last time I had just like a more generic PC problem, I had some error of some sort. It wasn't like a JavaScript thing. It was like my Windows PC was doing something funny, And the last time was a few months ago. And I searched for that. That was an eye-opening new experience because it's never been great to do that because like you find these like weird forums and these weird sites kind of cross-posting each other's content and stuff. But it was now very clearly just pure AI garbage, right? Like top to bottom. And I couldn't, like everything was just the same, like, it's kind of like when you call customer service, and they're like, did you turn it
variations
on,
on a theme. You're like, none of this is answering my question because you're not listening to what I'm saying.
Yeah, you don't actually.
Parroting.
Yeah, and there's so much of it that Google can't differentiate, right? And I was like, okay, so we're already, for certain kinds of problems, we're already there. Yeah.
Isn't this wild though? Because like, man, if you're an AI company right now, you've hit the jackpot because you're now able to sell the solution to the problem that you're making money by creating yourself, right?
Both baby. Yeah, that's good.
Like, because now, like when I need answers to a question, the first thing I do is I open ChatGPT.
Yeah, because you can't get it off of Google anymore.
Even to a point where like there's this. All right, so many moons ago, when I first moved into this house, our dad came down and he's like, "Let's get some fucking plants back here. I'm a druid, right?" So we go to Home Depot and we go to the nursery, we get a bunch of plants, and we get a pair of these shrubs, and put them by the fence in the back.
Boxwoods.
Well, that's the thing. I don't know what they are. They're some kind of evergreen shrubs. Okay, one of them died, so I've got asymmetrical shrubs, and I'm looking at the one. I'm like, I don't know what this is. Like, I don't know what kind of shrub this is. And for years, every now and then, I would think of that. I'm like, let me like do some Googling, and I'm Googling. I'm trying to figure out like what is this shrub. But the way to do that is, it's like I'm just looking at different kinds of shrubs and trying to figure out, does this match kind of?
Have you tried using the plant ID thing?
There's a pretty good plant idea.
Well, eventually what I did just like a few weeks back is I just took a picture of the shrub and I just asked ChatGPT what it is. And it's like, this is the kind of shrub that is. And I was like, oh, and then I Googled it and yep, that's the one. Right. Yeah. And so, like we had this with, we were doing some, creating some Git hooks that required some like bash scripts and things like that. And Adam was like,
I was like, I could take half an hour to like remember how to do all this stuff and like do some testing and get it right, or I could just ask a thing.
Just write 2 sentences in a ChatGPT and just get exactly what you need, and then you can ask follow-up questions like, "Wait, what does this symbol?"
Yeah, and then I can evaluate that and then test that thing, and then because ChatGPT, it's not magic, right? It's still doing its best. And it's very frequently at least a little bit wrong. So you still got to evaluate it. But the fact that you can get a specific answer to a specific question that is, depending on the kind of question that can be closer to right than wrong, puts you in a really good head start position right for a lot of stuff.
You're not digging.
I think, and we're actually entering into this strange new web where starting in like the late 90s up until pretty recently, the biggest problem on the web was search, because there was a volume of content on the web that was searchable, right? Like if you wanted an article about something, you could look that thing up and there's going to be some articles about it, and a couple of them will be like the ones that you need, right? Well, now if you search for something on a topic, you're going to get 1 trillion fucking hits, and almost all of them are just copy paste, traffic jacking, AI generated garbage.
Which I would say the problem is still
whatever,
search. It's just now.
Well, the difference now though is like what that means is it's no longer about pointing you to that site. It's not like searching for a site. It's now
summarizing.
Like there's just too much. Like the sites are all worthless, right?
It's actually so now search and summarize is the thing.
Yeah.
It's not just
it's just give me the exact information I want, and I can't necessarily articulate it perfectly, because in order to get exactly what I want from something like Google, I have to articulate it perfectly. And there's so much shit out there.
And even if you do, but it's insufficient.
Yeah. And so I'm still very curious as to like how Google is gonna over time deal with this, because it seems like their business model is not doing too hot, sort of like
Well, if you think about
conceptually.
the other side of their business model is selling, because they have all their ads, but because they sell ads on the search platform, sure, right? But they also sell them on other websites, right? But
Yeah, and if people don't go to
if
websites,
nobody's going to websites and nobody can do a search, where's all of Google's ad money go? Basically, YouTube is all that's left at that point.
yeah, and kind of like the same thing that's happening to like that we experienced when we first entered games, where it's like, oh yeah, there's like 7,000 mobile games coming out a week, and the big challenge for us is just how do we even how do people even see our games when they're just thrown into this giant pile? Well, now, the same thing will happen with whatever website you create at all. There will be 7,000 versions of that site coming out that week. Right? It's just what's going to happen.
It has always been the case, right? That there's too much in the sense of like just being able to surface your stuff. But I think what we're talking about here is like there's an exponential increase, not in necessarily in competing things, but in just noisy reversions or reaction. It's like reaction videos on YouTube to me. It's like kind of the same, which is like these AI created site, like Adam, what you're describing feels like it's like a reaction.
It's
video.
recycling of content.
Yeah. It's a content mill thing because that's actually how the internet, everybody makes money on the internet, right?
It's our Clone Wars, right?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Everything is just a increase. Well, but the funny thing about it too is like, the long term result of this is the whole snake eating its own tail chaos thing, because the sites that are cloning things also clone from the other sites that are cloning things, right? Because it's just bots talking to bots and bots scraping stuff and creating content, right? And of course all the content is coming from websites, but things like the Chat GPT or things like OpenAI, right, are going to have the same problem that we have. Like, how do they identify what source material to steal for their robot to feed their robot, right? Because in the past they could basically like kind of scrape everything and kind of capture humanity,
because it was mostly human. Well,
because it was
mostly human made.
Yeah,
maybe like
and they still have to
human-made.
curate it to some extent, and moderate it ideally, and all that kind of stuff, right? But the one thing they could at least have some confidence in was that this stuff was made by a person, and if it was like duplicated, it was just a person just literally plagiarized somebody else's stuff, right? It's kind of what we're looking at. It's just a literal copy. But now what's going to happen is almost everything that OpenAI sees in its potential training set is also weird cloned.
Yeah, it's
just worse versions of stuff, also with a lot of because also there's a statistical problem, right, of overrepresentation of particular concepts, particular ways of writing, particular whatever, right? And so the stuff that OpenAI generates is going to become overrepresented. It's going to just be continually training on itself, right? So
yeah, which then just creates a reinforcement loops where, like, for example, if your LLM, like a ChatGPT, ChatGPT specifically has a tendency to start sentences with "it's important to remember that."
Yeah,
like that's a phrase that when you see that phrase, you're like, I think an AI wrote this, right? Well, if a bunch of people have Reddit bot accounts and they use ChatGPT to generate comments or whatever to farm karma, which is a thing people are doing, then a lot of the posts that they write, that they have their AI write, will have that phrase in them. Yep. Well, Reddit is about to do their IPO. They're about to go public. And a big part of their new profit model is selling the content that the users have generated on Reddit
to Google,
selling that to other companies to train their AIs.
To Google specifically, which I think is even funnier.
Because I think Google is going to start buying OpenAI's
AI's output. Yeah. And so, but then like if OpenAI trains on Reddit stuff, then it's training on itself and it will just continually reinforce its tendencies. And this is, people talk, it's kind of like inbreeding, right? With AI, right? It's like, it needs a diversity of genetic material. It needs a diversity of inputs coming in. Otherwise, its recessive traits will take over, right? Yep. That's the kind of idea.
But that's the thing. It's like, because naturally, the stuff that's becoming the most statistically predominant is going to be AI spam. It's going to be AI, but not just AI generated. Because like you can do in collaboration with an AI, especially as they get better, you can do good work, right? The problem is that still takes work. It still takes time. It's trivial to just be like, hey, here's a title, write a post about this, and then not even read it and post it, right? You can just do that. And so that is
from the
what's
volume
going to
of
be
spam I've gotten this season.
Yeah, email spam too, yeah.
It is definitely
happening.
because it's like, I don't know who is doing this, but I'm like, I mean, I'm like, oh my God, you guys, you know what is, you're feeding our name in and then getting stuff, and it's like, it's still as bad as it was. I don't know how, look, I know people are using AI tools to write their fucking cold emails, you know what I mean? But like, they're still wrong just most of the time. And I'm like,
but now they can be wrong at scale. And that's basically what we get, right? So that's gonna be the thing is like, it doesn't matter that these things can also be used in an effective, less just value negative way, right? There's still lots of ethical considerations about whether it can be ethically positive, period, blah, 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 right? But it's the easy way to use it is the literally zero value way. Is the one that produces junk. And as a consequence, that just is what we're going to have. We're just going to have almost like the world will just be spam. Like the internet will be just spam. And it already was. It's important to remember because it always was easiest to do that stuff, right? And it always was the highest incentive to do that stuff.
The real world still exists.
Go touch grass. Go touch grass.
Touch grass. My pro tip for the next decade: go touch grass.
And soon we'll just have no choice because none of the fun stuff we got to go find.
So get used to the grass. It's a little pokey sometimes, you know.
Yeah, we didn't realize that like the robot wars that we were all envisioning in the future actually wouldn't involve us at all. It's just robots. It's just a bunch of robots just spamming at each other on the internet while we're just outside sitting around a fire pit vibing like cavemen. You know, like that's the ideal scenario. Let's just get out of there.
Get out of there.
Yeah, just go outside. All right. Well, I hope that answers your question about Notion versus Favro.
You know how it is around here. I don't know. We gotta go over there and then come back and go over there. You know,
like so is that Favro great for tasks, Notion great for long-term information storage, and it has that cool AI thing. So go check that out. Mm-hmm. And that's all the time we have for this week. We'd like to thank our producers, Fat Bard and Sampa DaCosta, for putting the podcast together. And thanks to our community moderators who keep our Discord running. To get more involved in the Butterscotch community, just go to podcast.bscotch.net, where we have links to the Discord, a way for you to donate, and links to the podcast archives. And as always, if you haven't done it yet, head on over to Steam and give Crashlands 2 a wish list. It'll help boost the game on the charts as we lead up to the launch, which, you know, is coming at some point. We don't have a date yet, but, you know, every little bit helps. So we'd appreciate that. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Goodbye.
Bye.